I've been investing in real estate since 2008 at the age of 23, and since that time I have been involved in over 143 real estate transactions, mainly fix and flip. And in this video, I'm going to be sharing my breakdown of my top lessons, some of the scars that I've made, money that I've lost, contractors that I've hired, and profits that I've made so you can implement it in your real estate business. So let's get into it. This is probably one of the biggest lessons I've learned doing over 100 deals in the last 16 years, that at the end of the day, in real estate, the numbers are going to guide you. And what I mean by that is the numbers don't lie. If you're looking at a property, whether it's a rental, whether it's a buy and hold, whether it's a fix and flip or a wholesale or even an Airbnb, you have to look at the numbers and you have to remove your emotions out of it. Now, this is a saying that we tell people, like when you're buying a property or when someone's buying their own personal home and then you have a wife and husband walking through that house, you know, it's all about the emotions. It's about staging. It's about creating that feeling of where the couch is going to go, where their bed's going to go, and all these things. But you know what? Same thing applies to investors, where if there's an investor, especially new ones I've seen, even based on my own experience, where you're just excited to get a deal done. You know, there's a deal in front of you. It's selling for 60 cents on the dollar. Maybe you don't look at all of the numbers and, you know, it might seem a little bit tight, but you just say, hey, you know what? I have nothing I'm working on. I might as well do it. It looks like I'm still going to make about maybe $15, $20, or even $10,000. And then guess what? You end up getting burned. So again, keeping your emotions out of this is going to help you even as an investor, because at the end of the day, you need to look and analyze the numbers efficiently. And I'm going to talk a little bit about this as we go into how to analyze comparables. So that's lesson number one. Over the years, I've dealt with numerous amount of contractors, some good, some not so good. And honestly, most of them have been not so good. And this is not just the GC, the general contractor, but this is the sub trades. And just again, it goes along in this type of work. There are unethical contractors everywhere. And again, at the other side, the flip side, there's good contractors, right? But you figuring out a way or having some sort of system in place that's going to help you determine that, it's going to help you in this journey. Now, this is one thing I see far too often, and one thing that I did early on is before fully vetting a contractor, getting a referral, looking at some of their current and past projects, getting referrals from current or past customers or investors, because I didn't do those things, and then I handed over a 50% deposit even before that contractor did no work on that job, you know, we ended up getting burned on deals. And in the early days when I was starting off, I didn't know this. I thought this was just a norm because I was not educated. I wasn't educated. I didn't have the right information. And it wasn't until actually getting burned by a few contractors that I realized that at the end of the day, whether you're using your money or you're using an investor's money, a partner, a lender, a JV partner, you better check that contractor out. You better check the Better Business Bureau, maybe even going as far as checking any court proceedings in your local area or city where there's been any judgments against this contractor. Because for most people, they're finding contractors on online classifieds or marketplace or Kijiji. And again, you end up, you know, talking to somebody, they seem all right, they look like a contractor, and then you hire them and you're handing them over tens of thousands of dollars. And again, I've done this where, you know, I've hired painters in the past, and again, I've given, you know, $1,000 or $2,000 deposits, and then they're gone. Like, they totally disappear. And it makes me think like, wow, they've made a business out of this. They're actually going out there and scamming people. And so this is one of the major lessons I've learned over the time is that you need to have a vetting process. You need to ask the right questions. And again, you need to ask for referrals. That's probably the biggest takeaway when you're dealing with contractors. So again, you don't get burned. My next point is, this is more for new real estate investors. Now, when I started off, I didn't have a background in renovations. I didn't grow up with my dad teaching me how to put up drywall or, you know, even change the toilet, like little things like that. I didn't grow up learning all these kinds of things where, you know, there's a lot of people in real estate, you know, they learned that stuff. You know, they know how to put on a roof. They know how to take off shingles. They know how to put siding. But for someone like me, and for some, like a lot of you watching here, you might not have that experience. And when it comes to hiring contractors, what I suggest is, especially if you're new and you're trying to gauge the market, you're trying to go to Home Depot, you're trying to go to Rona, you're trying to go to any hardware store, and you're trying to figure out what materials are, it's best to pay for those materials yourself. Now, for me today, because I have so much experience and I have contractors that I trust, and because I have learned to figure out the price, the average price of materials like faucets and countertops and things like that, I can pay my contractor in their budget, in their scope of work. I can pay them on their estimate, the labor and the material. But in the beginning, I didn't do that. And again, what I learned is I wanted to go out there, and through trial and error, I figured out that I needed to be paying for these materials, because when I got that estimate from the contractor based on my scope of work and kind of the itemized quote that I wanted to get done, I had no idea what these things cost, right? Putting up, a sheet of drywall, getting some lumber, buying shingles for the roof, buying flooring. You know, is it $1 a square foot? Or is it $2 a square foot, right? Am I buying laminate or hardwood? And these things, again, they cost money. So especially if you're new, you want to go out there and try to figure out these prices yourself, right? So that is so important, because when you do get experience and, you know, maybe let's say you've done 1 or 2 or 3 jobs, now you have an idea of what things cost. So when you do find a contractor, and when you're like, hey, you know what, I'm getting a couple of deals, I can't be shopping around for all this material, but now you can gauge what materials cost. Well, you'll be in a better position to hire a contractor who's not going to just screw you over and mark up the materials like super high. So again, in the beginning, pay for those materials yourself. Yes, is it going to be more time consuming? Of course, but is it going to cost you money, or save you money, I should say, in the long run? Yes, it is. It's going to save you a lot of headache, that things you don't have to do yourself. Every contractor is going to have a different payment schedule that they require, and obviously based on what you have in the bank, or if you have the funds to pay them, or however you've set up your business. One thing I really suggest is, no matter what, this is a cardinal rule when dealing with contractors, is you do not want to release the last payment schedule until you have had a walkthrough of that property and until you have approved their work. And what I mean by that is, in the beginning, I used to be, I would be in such a rush to list the property or get the tenants in place or go to the bank and ask for a refinance. And I would just, the contractor would be leaving on a Thursday or Friday. They've told me that they're wrapping up the job. And I'm like, yeah, that's great. I've gone there, or I've sent, one of my partners there, and we ended up paying the contractor way too early, and before actually thoroughly going through the property, taking a piece of green painter's tape and just, checking off certain things where, they need to come back and they need to finish. Maybe there's some paint that was missed, or, there's some cleaning that needs to be done, or there's garbage in the back, their dumpster's still there. And then I ended up paying that contractor way too early. And it was like pulling teeth to get them back in that house, right? To get them back. Once they get the payment, they're not motivated anymore, right? And again, I see far too many investors, especially new investors, they'll pay that final installment because the contractors they're on their case. They want to get paid. They want to, they're shutting off, or maybe it's on a Friday and they just want to wrap up the job and just get on with their day, pay their guys. But again, you pay them too early, and then trying to get them back there to actually finish it, or maybe they missed a couple of things knowingly or not. Again, it's hard, right? So do not make your final payment until you have gone through, you have approved it. The contractor has come back and finished those small items, sometimes large items. And then again, it's motivation. It'll motivate them to finish the job. My next lesson is, when you're paying a contractor, let's say you get a quote, labor and materials, right? This one thing that has served me really well is having a buffer. And what I mean by that is, just because a contractor tells you that labor material property is going to cost you $40,000, $50,000, $60,000, $100,000, and you just go with that, right? You say, okay, great, I'm going to run my numbers based on your $50,000 quote. I know what the after repair value is. I know what my sale price is going to be, or I know what my refinance price is going to be, my appraisal is going to come in at, and then you just take their quote and then you run with it. And then guess what happens is, there's surprises. You open up the wall and you find asbestos on the heat vents. You open up the floors. There's a boiler in the basement that's been there since 1920. It needs to be removed. And again, I'm telling you all these things because I've gone through them, and I figured out that in the early days, I didn't have a buffer fund. So if a contractor told me it's $50,000, I'd say, okay, great, let's do the job. And now what I do is I actually take that number. So if someone tells me that their quote's going to be, their estimate's going to be 50 grand, I want to tackle on a 10, or what I really prefer is a 15% buffer on top of that, right? What's 15% added on to $50,000? Now, if doing that, it makes my numbers tight, walk away from the deal, or change your scope of work so it matches it and it still makes sense to do the deal. Again, don't try to make the numbers work. Add in a buffer. And again, a lot of unexperienced investors, they don't have a buffer, right? This is more like a rainy day fund. This is a buffer. This is a buffer for your project, not if things gonna happen, it's when. When is something gonna happen with that job? And again, out of doing 100 deals in the last 16 years, there's only a handful of properties, maybe on two hands where I can count, that everything went according to the scope of work, according to the estimate, because there's always things that come up, right? There's always, I guarantee you, if you do this business long enough, it'll do it. But if you're adding in a buffer, you're gonna set yourself up for more success, where you're not squeezing the deal. You're not, putting pressure now on the contractor, putting pressure on the stagers, and just, again, stressing everybody that's working with you on the deal, because now you didn't account for something, you didn't have a buffer, and now you're burned and the deal is tight. Or now maybe, you were gonna make $30,000, but now you're only making $15,000. And again, it makes that deal really tight. So again, use a buffer. My next point is over renovating. And again, just like it sounds, you want to make sure that depending on the area that your home is in, your property is in, whether it's an A-class neighborhood, like, homes are expensive, it's a B-class where, the median price of buyers, your biggest pool of buyers are wanting to move in, or it's maybe a lower class, kind of a lower inner city area. Are you renovating that home according to standards? If in the beginning, we started off in the core, we used to flip a lot of houses and buy rentals in the core. We don't do that now, but in the beginning I did, because that was where my budgets were, right? But in the beginning, I would over renovate, and I'd look at these other homes or peers of mine, and I'm like, man, they're putting in granite countertops, they're putting stainless steel appliances. I need to do that. And again, I found out that I didn't get my money back. It wasn't like I put $1 in material and I got $2 back out. So again, it's really easy to start over renovating, because when you're just in the gear of things and you're doing stuff and you're like, you know what, well, I can do that. It wasn't in my scope, but you know what? Yeah, let's go ahead and do that, because I think I can, I think I can add a door there, or you know what? I wasn't going to take this wall down, but I think we should take this wall down. And now I need an electrical engineer. Now I need the city involved and all this stuff that sounds crazy. Because, you're doing all those things, and you're thinking about it, you're like, yeah, this is going to add value to the property. Why wouldn't I do this? I know it wasn't in the original scope, but let me do this. And again, you start over renovating. And then what you're doing is, that profit that you might have had, that'll shrink down super fast, because not just because if you're putting in something that's a higher end renovation, you're not going to get that money back. It doesn't work that way, right? I wish it did, but it doesn't work that way. So again, what I'm saying is you don't want to go cheap on all your material and just put garbage up and have crappy work. I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is you don't want to over renovate. So if you look at the comparables of your property, of your subject property, and you're looking at all these other comparables in your area, and they're like, hey, you know what? They maybe didn't put marble, they didn't put granite. They have, they went to Home Depot and they bought a countertop. They bought a laminate countertop, and I guess these other properties are selling with laminate countertops. They're selling with okay flooring. They're selling with maybe white appliances, not stainless steel, and they still sold. I know that people have bought these kinds of homes based on this level of renovation or, even materials. Well, guess what? I'm gonna do that to that standard, because that's how you're going to save, and that's how you're not going to put yourself in a weird situation where, again, you over renovate. You have a beautiful property, but then you lose money, right? You're in this business to make money and to make money for the long haul. Not every property that you buy is going to fit your buy box. And so what I mean by that is you might be a person that buys multifamily properties, right? And then you might come across a property that is more of a short-term fix and flip, right? It's a single family home. And again, you look at it and you're like, hey, I could probably make money on this, but maybe it's not your specialty. It's not the niche that you know very well. So what I always say is have a plan B, have a plan C. So if it doesn't fit your buy box, maybe you don't want to do it. Maybe you don't have the team yet to do that, or the time or the experience. Maybe you can put that property on the market. Maybe you can give it to a realtor and maybe get a referral out of it, or maybe get a gift card out of it. Maybe you can put it under contract and wholesale it to a buyer, or maybe buy it yourself and relist it on the market. So again, have a exit strategy or have a plan B, because not every property that comes in, whether you're doing private marketing, whether you're finding deals on the market, you have realtors calling you, if it doesn't fit your buy box, you still want to make sure that you're not leaving money on the table. You can do something with that property. You can add value to some other investor and get paid for it. Again, you don't want to be letting some deals go just because it's not your niche. Again, I've learned this over time. I didn't do this in the beginning, but as I started getting more experience, as I started meeting more investors in my area, I started seeing that, hey, look, I'm building a network of investors. Not everybody does the same niche as me, right? Not everybody wants to flip homes or build homes for resale. So what can I do with this property? And then what I started doing was, I would tie up those properties. Maybe I would do a JV with them where, they did all the work and, we provided the money, or where we wholesaled it to them. Again, we had an exit strategy. We didn't want to leave money on the table. If you're in this business long enough, you will know that, again, surprises come up. It goes back to one of the lessons that I just gave. So this is more for people that are buying, fixing, and selling, right? Buying, building, you built a home and you sold it to a buyer. Or even if you've refinanced or you did a BRRRR on a property and now you've had tenants move in, you want to have reserve funds in the bank. And what I mean by that is, even as a real estate investor, you don't want to be living paycheck to paycheck. So, you sell a home, that a new buyer moves in, and then maybe 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 1 week after, they start noticing like, oh my gosh, the handle just fell off, right? Or, the flooring's kind of heaving, or whatever this is. You find there's issues that maybe you didn't notice, or your contractor didn't notice, and now you have to go back and fix it, which you should, because, your reputation, you got to value it more than gold and silver, right? As the good book says. So again, having a reserve fund set aside where if there are problems, you can go and fix them quickly, right? This business, again, it's about reputation. And again, having a business where you're not just going back to your lender or your JV partner and saying, hey, by the way, we just sold a property, the buyers moved in, and now there's a couple of issues. Can I have some more money? Right? That's not good. That's not going to be a repeatable investor for you. So again, learn from my mistakes. I've done this quite often where we didn't have reserve funds. We would just, take all the money that we made, put it in our account, put it in marketing, and then we would go back out again. But now what I've learned is I always want a healthy budget. And what I recommend is if you sold the property for, 300 grand, 400, 500, I like to save, or I like to put at least 2 to 3% on the sale price in a buffer fund. And I tell this, if I'm buying properties with a JV partner or a private lender using debt or equity, I tell them this is in my contract that I want this set aside. And again, what this does is, especially if you're buying multiple deals like we do, and you're using OPM, other people's money, it just shows that it also shows your partners or your lenders that you are a professional. You're thinking of these things, not if they're going to happen or when they're going to happen, and you're ready for them. When it comes to using other people's money, you need to proceed with caution, especially if you're a new investor and you're looking to borrow money for the first time. And what I mean is, if you're out there and you're looking at deals and you buy a property and you're paying, let's say you borrow $100,000, you're paying 12% per annum, right? You're paying 1% a month on that. that, and you list your property, or you go to the bank and you're trying to do a BRRRR and you're refinancing it, and you don't get that sale right away. Your refi doesn't go through for another 2 or 3 months because the bank said, hey, you know what, we want 2 or 3 months of rent coming in before we refinance it. Well, guess what? If you're paying a private lender on that deal, that can erode your investment. If you only budgeted for 3 months of borrowing money, now it's actually 6 months, or your property, for whatever reason, it hasn't sold yet, that can erode your investment very quickly. And because you maybe rushed the deal and you didn't factor in these other expenses because you're like, hey, this deal is going to go great and I am going to sell it in 3 months, it just looks super bad. And again, this is how you will lose money. This has happened to us not just once, a few times where we got burned. And at the end of the day, we ended up buying a flip, or we bought a property for the purpose of making money. And then after all the smoke settled, the lender was the one who made all the money, right? We paid them. We didn't lose, we lost money, but they made the money because we had this loan to pay. So again, you don't want to be in that position, right? You're not getting into this business of scaling or using outside investors to not make money and just have your investor make it. You do want your investor to make the money, but you want to also make money in the process. And again, on this channel, I talk a lot about private marketing, off-market deals, how to find deals with private sellers or for sale by homeowners. But there are also ways to find deals specifically on the MLS. And one thing that we've implemented over the years is I have asked our realtors for specific links. So every time a property that's been sitting on the market for 30 days, 60 days, 90 days, expired listings, voluntarily withdrawn listings, I get auto emails. So why I do that is, and I learned this from somebody else, is why I do that is because if there's a property that's been sitting on the market, and let's say the average DOM, days on market, is 14 days or 1 month, and now the property's been on the market for 1 month or 60 days or 90 days, I will get an auto email from the MLS, from the Matrix portal, and it'll tell me that this property, it just hit 31 days on the market. It just hit 61 days, 91 days on the market. And now what that shows me is this homeowner, maybe there's some motivation there. The house has been sitting. I could see that they started selling their home at $500,000. Now it's down to like 440, right? And it's been sitting for 90 days. Well, that shows me that there's maybe some level of motivation. And I have picked up deals over the years because I have these specific searches that I look for. The other thing is, when you're looking at deals on the MLS, you can ask your realtor to put in specific keywords. So what I mean by that is, if there is a listing that goes up in your area and it says, there's anything in that listing or the public remarks and it says fixer upper, estate sale, handyman special, anything like that, you're going to get an email. And again, we have picked up deals where most investors, they might overlook this, or maybe they're not doing any of this. They're just looking for your standard, I'll just get a listing when a property goes up and I'll just view it. You're not going to get a deal that way. You have to be very strategic. Again, implement this strategy and get on one of these listings that I've talked about, or even all of them. So again, you can cherry pick. You can start finding that motivated seller. That's what it is at the end of the day, right? Whether you're finding deals off market or on market, it's all about assessing motivation, right? How motivated is the seller? The more motivation there is, the more likely they are to accept your offer and for you to come in there and solve their problem. When it comes to using OPM, other people's money, whether you're using debt or equity, one thing you need to understand is everything is negotiable. In the beginning, when I started bringing in investors, when I ran out of funds, I realized that, wow, man, I'm paying a lot of money to these people. And then I started realizing that as I got more experience, as I started networking, as I started, getting referrals from people that they knew other investors, I started realizing that, man, there is more money than deals. And that's not what I thought in the beginning. I was like, because in the beginning I didn't have experience and I was like, holy moly, I can't even get somebody to give me $100,000 to buy a property. But that's not the case as I started getting experience. And so really it was a mental shift. And I realized that When I'm at that kitchen table and I'm talking to a couple or family and friends, in my case, that want to invest, I know that everything is negotiable. So if they're asking for 15% per annum, or they're asking to take 60% of the equity, I can negotiate because there's more money out there than deals. And that's the truth. You might not think that, maybe because you're new, you haven't experienced it, but if you do this business long enough, like I have, you will notice that. So when you're going out there, you need to also think of yourself as an expert, right? You are a trusted advisor. And that person, they might have the money, but you're bringing the team, you're bringing the deal, you're bringing your network, you're bringing the contractors, the stagers, the realtors, the lawyer, the accountant, you're bringing your power team together. And because you have this, right, you hold the key, right? You hold the key for them making money. And you don't need to be arrogant about this. You don't need to be cocky or be prideful, but you need to know internally that, hey, they're only going to make money if you make money. So you need to figure out some terms and conditions, whether you're using debt or equity, that's gonna make money for both of you. And that's how I go into, not even a negotiation, I go into meeting. When I'm meeting with somebody for the first time and they're looking to be a private lender, they're looking to be a JV partner, I think of that, hey, how can we both add value, and how can we create a win-win relationship where it's not just one-sided? I can't emphasize this enough. When you're buying, fixing, and selling homes, staging works. When I was getting into properties, I first off didn't really even know the concept of staging. It was very new. Like, people were just starting to actually stage homes, and companies were coming up. So this was back in 2007, 2008, right? Most of the homes weren't staged back then. People just didn't do it. It wasn't a thing. And so my early on, I was just like, you know what? I'd renovate the house. It was like brand new. We'd fix everything and then we would sell it, right? And then I started realizing in the market, I'm like, man, why are these other homes selling faster? Like, why are they selling? And I started noticing that these homes were staged. They hired a company that brought in furniture, that, were trained in interior design, and they had beautiful furniture. They put it up for, again, a fraction of the cost that you spent on that house, right? Like $2,000 a month or $1,500 a month or whatever their fee was. I started noticing that a lot of homes were selling. So what I started doing was I started staging, right? I didn't do it in the beginning, and I was very, very, there was a bit of friction there for sure, because I didn't want to, and I was like, man, I just spent money on this home, I just did renovations, I don't want to spend an additional $3,000-$4,000 to stage this home. But now, fast forward to 2024, almost every home is staged. And it's for that reason, because again, going back to what I said earlier in one of the points, is when somebody's walking through that house, they want to emotionally feel. You want to get them emotionally involved in buying that home, whether, it's a wife, husband, or any spouse or people looking at it. And if they can go through that home and they can really get attached, and where they can see this is where the TV would be, and this is where our kid's bedroom would be. And look, it looks like there's some staged children's toys. All of that's going to speak to their emotions. And again, so when in doubt and you're thinking about it and you're like, I don't know if I can do it, stage the home. And going back to what I said earlier, when you're running your numbers, make sure you have a staging budget in there. So you're not frantic at the end of the project and you're like, oh my gosh, I can't afford to stage this home. I'm not going to, right? You're gonna put that in as an itemized expense, and you're gonna run your deal, or you should run your deals based on staging it, especially if you're building homes for resale or you're buying, fixing, and selling. And again, I know some landlords that go as far as even staging their rental, right? So again, if you want to get to that level, they know that, because if they're staging their home as a rental, again, who are they trying to attract there, right? Who are they trying to attract, right? Maybe more of a higher end tenant, because a home, they can see that, they can feel how it's going to be living in their home, even if they're not buying it for the long term. My next point is, in this business, not just real estate, but even the other businesses I've been in, it pays to be nice. And that sounds so simple, but it's so true because I remember this one time we were marketing and we were dropping off flyers in this area, and I had this homeowner called me, and as I was walking into the property, I saw another investor who I knew walking out of it. And this investor had a bit of a reputation of being a bit too aggressive, and I knew them, right? So when I walked into that home, after getting to know, building rapport and having that owner show me things, at the end of that meeting, we actually put that property under contract. And I'll never forget what this investor said. This was years ago. He said, one of the reasons that I did this deal with you, Manji, today was, you were just kind of easier to deal with. It was very pleasant dealing with you. That other person came in, they seemed a little sleazy. They were trying to force me to, put my property under contract. I wasn't quite ready. I didn't feel comfortable. And we ended up getting that deal because essentially what he said was we were easier to deal with, right? He didn't say this verbatim, but he was basically saying you were nicer to deal with. And again, in this business, it does pay to be nice. Of course, it doesn't matter what business you're in. So especially if you're dealing with homeowners, you're marketing for deals, these people are going through tons of things in their life. They're maybe dealing with a bankruptcy, a foreclosure, a divorce, a separation, an estate sale. There's all these emotions involved. And if you can just be that kind of, that light in their day that you can just come in and be easy to deal with. And this is the beauty about dealing with even off-market properties that I love, because it's all relationship driven, right? You're dealing with that homeowner, it's just you. It's very, very different when you're buying properties on the MLS. There's no connection there. So again, it pays to be nice. And if you maybe have a reputation, like maybe a little bit like I did early on, and I'm not gonna lie, there was days that I would be a little bit aggressive as well. I've learned that does not work. My next point is you want to solve people's problems. In this business, you only get paid when you solve somebody's problem. And the bigger the problem, the more money you're going to make, right? As the saying goes. And in this business, at the end of the day too, it's not always just money. Like going back to my last point, some people, they just want better terms. And in the beginning, I would deal like, hey, if I can offer them the most, if I can offer them more money than the next person, they're gonna take my offer. And then what I realized is through learning and building rapport and learning how to ask the right questions, I learned how to talk to homeowners. I learned that through skillful questions, and again, I'm gonna make a video on this and give you a script of exactly what I say at that kitchen table. When I realized and I tried to figure out, what is this homeowner's needs, right? Do they want to move to an apartment? Are they afraid that they're not going to have enough money to clean their home or, get rid of the junk? Are they not going to have enough money to pay somebody to move their stuff to the apartment or to the next house, right? Are they not going to have enough money left over to even put some money in their pocket after paying all the expenses and the liens and the, all the other things registered on title, right? What are their needs? There was a time where I remember on a deal talking to this owner, they were just worried about not making their kids' childcare expenses for the next couple of months, right? They're like, hey, childcare is very expensive. We're spending $50 a day and we don't know if we're gonna have enough. And you know what, in that deal, yes, I could have paid them more money and it would have covered that. But what I decided to do in there, and I thank God for this wisdom that he gave me, it was, hey, why would it be helpful if I actually put in my offer under the other terms that I cover your expenses? I actually give you the amount that you need for 3 months of your childcare expenses. Like, would that help you? Would that help you like selling this deal and making sure everything is taken care of? And they were like, yeah, of course, right? So again, we've paid for people's lawyers, right? The lawyer costs when you buy a home, it comes from the proceeds of the sale. But again, if I can cover that expense for them, I will. If I can pay for their moving costs, I will. And again, I've done all of this, right? The only thing that's stopping you is your creativity, right? It's not one solution, cookie cutter approach that fits all. And my last point is you want to be diligent and you want to safeguard your money or your investors' money. It is so easy to get burned in this business, especially if you're rushing a deal. There's been many instances where I didn't have anything that I was working on and I was just getting antsy and fidgety. And I was like, my contractors that I have, they're going to just go to somewhere else. And I ended up buying deals where I just kind of like, the numbers were okay and I just bought them and I ended up losing money. right? And I ended up losing money on those deals. Again, thank God I've never lost an investor money. It just came out of our pocket and our previous deals profits. But again, what I've learned to do is slow the deal down. And again, I say this, one of my investor friends, and I love this quote from him. He says, Manjeet, it's better to be outside the market, outside of the real estate market, wishing you were in, than inside the market, holding on to some crappy deal, wishing you were out, right? So you want to take your time, especially if you're new. You want to look at the numbers. You want to look at the comparables. You want to look at what are you paying that investor? What's the sale price of this home? You need to factor in all of those things. And again, the earlier, the newer you are, the more time it's going to take. And you know what? That's okay. That's how we learn. And I hope in this video, that's what you've kind of came away from it is learning that being a professional real estate investor who's not just going to be in this business for 12 months, which is like what I see a lot today. People get into the business, they buy a bad deal and then they're out. They're back to their job and they're like, oh, real estate sucks. Real estate doesn't work. No, real estate works. You just need to know the rules of the game, right? So again, guys, thank you so much for watching this video. I hope you found tons of value. And if you did, feel free to like or comment or even share. I'd love to hear your experience. And what's the 1 or 2 lessons that you've learned in your own business from doing deals? I'd love to hear that in the comments below. We'll talk to you all soon.